Hello and good morning. My name is Margaret-Ann Splawn. I am the Executive Director of the Climate Markets and Investment Association. We are an independent, not-for-profit organization providing leadership to the private sector in the delivery of climate investment policy and market mechanisms. We hold 3 active private sector observer seats, one at the Green Climate Fund, which is the only fund dedicated solely to climate finance. The second at the Climate Investment Funds, which is a World Bank initiative. We hold the active private sector observer seat there at the Forest Investment Programme and also at the Forest Carbon Partnership Facility. Today, we are here joined with 2 amazing ladies involved in climate finance. First of all, on the right-hand side, we've got Marion Verles. She is the CEO at the Gold Standard Foundation in Switzerland. She was previously the founder and executive director of Nexus, an innovative financing platform for pro-poor, low-carbon projects. We're joined by Fenella Aouane, which is the principal climate finance specialist at Global Green Growth Institute in London. She was previously a director for energy and environmental markets at Standard Bank. Ladies, thank you so much for joining me today. I wanted you to come here today specifically to talk about the private sector involvement and engagement in climate finance. When we look back, 2015 was the Paris Agreement, and that is fantastic that we had this agreement. This year is looking more at implementing. What does that mean, and how do we implement this? And next year, people are talking about next COP 23 in Bonn is going to be about capital raising. So I'd love to open the floor to both of you. Indices should be used for climate finance planning, and maybe if you wanted to open up, Marianne, and share a bit about what your thoughts are on this.
Sure, thank you, Margaret. And at Gold Standard, our mission is to catalyze more ambitious action for climate security and the global goals. And we do this by making it easier for the private sector to contribute to climate finance. I think there's 2 important things that we can do as a standard body to make it easier for the private sector to contribute to NDCs and to contribute to climate finance. On one hand, what we need to do is to make it easier and simpler for private sector investors to identify the projects they want, the projects that have the right risk profile, but also the projects that have that deliver the impacts that they are looking for. And so our gold standard for the global goals enable projects to quantify and use third-party verification to quantify the actual impacts that they are having beyond climate. So the climate contribution, but also the contributions to the global goals. And that's critical to unlock private sector finance. The second thing that is really important and on which we're working on with a number of civil society organizations that are supporting us is to make sure that the private sector is actually recognized for their actions. And they can be financially incentivized, and carbon finance has been extremely powerful to create the returns that were needed to trigger private sector investment. But we believe that we need to go beyond and also make it possible for the private sector to be recognized for the contributions that those investments are having towards the global goals. So give them recognition for contributing to climate finance, and our partners at CDP and WWF are helping us think through the process of how can we give private sector more recognition. Is it a better score? Is it more visibility from civil society organizations for being active contributors to the global goals as well?
Okay, thank you. That's great. And Fenella, I'd like to, how do your activities link directly either to the projects, or what is your work on the standards and work with the gold standard?
Sure, thanks, Margaret. And thank you, Marion. I'd like to support the great work that the gold standard has done over many years of tireless work. The Global Green Growth Institute, just a little bit about what we're about and what our activities are. We're the only organisation, internationally funded governmental organisation, that focuses purely on green growth. We deal with our member countries. We have about 24 member countries. activities and teams based in these countries who coordinate with government to help them plan for green growth. So it's greening their economic growth strategies. Now, within that, obviously, since we started, now there is the whole concept of NDCs. So this now links very neatly with the work that we'd already started around how to help countries plan. So now we're working around the NDCs, and in a way you could say the core of our work is how we're financing NDCs within our member countries. So my particular role, because of my background in banking, is actually to try and help link the climate finance available around the world, both nationally and internationally, to the projects on the ground. And increasingly what we're actually finding is it's not necessarily a shortage of finance, it's a shortage of projects. And sometimes people talk about, well, often people talk about bankable projects. And it's sometimes interesting to see the different concepts as to whether you're taking a project and trying to make it bankable, or whether you're finding finance and trying to match it to the project by making it less risk averse, or whether you're just trying to source a project that would be bankable anyway. And this has a big knock-on for the private finance and how we bring private finance in. Clearly, the overall goals are that we leverage heavily and we engage a lot with the private sector. It's tough, though. The private sector needs a return. Yes. They're not charities. That's the whole reason why they're the private sector. So how are they going to get a return? And the work that, with our new DG, Frank Reinbraun, we're now looking to bring in a lot around MRV. So it's around how are we going to monitor, how are we going to quantify what the benefits are of projects. And this is, I think, where we're going to be probably talking to the gold standard a lot more, because it's a lot of the work that you've done is not just around the emission reduction. It's around the additional benefits, whether they be health, wealth, other environmental benefits for countries. And can we quantify those? If we can quantify them, we can value them. And we can stick a probability to them that gives you a fair value.
I mean, I think that's a great point, but what's needed or what's required then to quantify? Are there more instruments? Is it another type of policy, or what's needed to quantify? Because I think if you can give the private sector more security, if the private sector has more security than investors, then it's easier for them to come in to these projects.
Yeah, so I think on the quantification front, we need to invest more in methodologies. We have now a wealth of carbon quantification methodologies. We need to do a similar exercise with the other global goals. Thinking beyond also our history and learning from the past, I think it's critical that this quantification and this third-party monitoring is made as simple as possible. So at Gold Standard, we are planning to invest massively in our IT infrastructure so that the private sector can see that it's almost as seamless as possible to go through the certification process, to reduce drastically transaction costs, and use a user-friendly IT interfaces to really make it as easy as possible to navigate the process. So that's one. I think what's also important is really to, once the outcome is quantified, like health, then there's an interesting exercise to try and identify, so who would actually pay for it? And so we have developed a health methodology that enables improved cook-stove projects to quantify not only their carbon impacts, but their health impacts. And what's interesting with health is that there's a direct link to GDP. You know that if you reduce indoor air pollution, you improve human health, and that has a direct positive effect on your country's GDP. So the national government or the subnational government may actually be interested in financing that health outcome, because they know that paying for the health benefits after they have occurred is a risk-free way to invest in their national GDP.
I think I'd just add to that, and I think it's extrapolating on from what you've said, is that, yes, you're quantifying it. It's the methodologies. It's, sadly, a lot of people on the ground collecting data through surveys, testing it, verifying it, and then making sure that that is continued on an onward basis on projects. Once you have that, yes, your national governments may well value it. But I think a step on, and I was speaking about this a couple of days ago at a Linking Climate Finance to Carbon Markets talk, we're saying each country has an NDC and has to reduce emissions according to their NDC goals. But what if, for the initial period of a catalytic transformational type of project, if the national government didn't want to pay for it or couldn't afford it, maybe they could sell that internationally. And if they sold the health benefit with the emission reduction internationally, someone valued it because they could use it for their NDC calculation. Now, clearly that means that the initial country loses out on that count because you can't double count. But maybe they're prepared to do that initially to cause that catalytic change for perhaps the first 5 projects so that the next 50 happen where they're not selling the emission reduction. And that we're starting work at GGGI on NDC collaboration and how we can try and look at some initial transactions that will allow that switch to happen. But clearly, we need to have the data. We need to be able to quantify these things.
Oh, that's interesting, the work, and particularly the linkage to GDP. I hadn't thought about that. Now, how is it a way, because two very different organizations, is there a way, if you were to work together, to finance together? I think one of the things that's needed in climate finance is collaboration. Is there a way, do you think there's a linkage between what you do that can either create new instruments or push for types of projects collaborating?
Yeah, I think collaborations are key, and we're running out of time, so we need to, at the same time, collaborate to establish proof of concept and also be ready to scale almost in parallel. So the way we are evolving our standard is to make sure it's fit for different purposes. So we are working very closely with private sector partners to make sure that we develop the tools and the processes that they need in order to decarbonize the supply chains. We'd be also very interested to work with GGGI to see if we can work together on one example, one NDC country example, and see how we can evolve our standard and our tools to make them fit for that very purpose.
Yes, and I think perhaps you brought together a beautiful collaboration here, Margaret-Ann.
That's what I do.
I think, yeah, I have to say that I came from a history for my sins of trading oil and then moved into carbon to atone for that. And what I've always found, having moved from banking and from private sector, is how amazingly collaborative the climate markets are naturally. A lot of the information is public. A lot of people are prepared to share an enormous amount, and it has done nothing but benefit the markets. So I do believe that there is an awful lot to be gained, and it's easy to do it. Sometimes I think the major restriction, hours in the day.
Interesting. Okay. So innovative products or projects, what's next on the horizon? Because I think both of you are working on, I'm very familiar with the gold standards work. You're cutting edge in some of the methodologies you provide. What's next? What are you working on that's exciting that you don't know how it's going to happen, but what problem are you guys looking to solve right now that you don't necessarily have the solution to, but it's nice to put it out there?
So, well, I mean, we are launching Gold Standard for the Global Goals. It's going to go live next year at the end of the second quarter. So really our ambition is to take our lessons from the carbon market, take them to the next level, and use that to serve the 17 global goals. So our ambition is to use the global goals and sustainable development as a lever to raise the ambitions for climate actions. And so by providing one standard, one platform that will enable the quantification of impacts across climate and the global goals, we hope to be a bridge between the climate finance sector and the sustainable development finance sector to really incentivize holistic actions that are contributing not only to climate security, but to sustainable development as well.
So can I just qualify that? So what you're saying is you guys are developing methodologies for each of the 17 SDGs?
So I think we'll want to be smarter than tackle each SDG in isolation. We're looking at cross-cutting methodologies that would cover several goals. We're looking at developing simple SDG tools that would give implementers, climate action implementers, an easy way to identify how to design their climate actions such that it maximizes sustainable development contributions. If you're implementing a renewable energy project or an energy efficiency project, how can you design it such that the dividends, the sustainable development dividends, are maximized?
Thank you, thanks. And Fenella, I always like how you come up with very innovative solutions.
Well, do you want the big picture? Do you want the middle picture? Do you want the little picture?
I want the picture that is interesting to you, that excites you in terms of you want to solve that, but you don't know how to do it.
I mean, as I've already said, the NDC collaboration, looking at Article 6, more around Article 6.4, as someone who's very familiar said, you know, what they want to do. If you think that managers ought to be, you know, fat or lean, lazy or busy, they want to make Article 6, you know, smart and lazy. They don't want it doing too much. They just want it opening the door. So it's up to the rest of us to work hard on how to work out how we might be able to make it work and how we might be able to make that level of collaboration and trade. Beyond that, look, we've got some big problems to solve. How do we make off-grid solar work properly? You know, as Google used to say, never saw a pilot that failed, never saw a pilot that scaled. So, you know, how do we move beyond and really scale up issues like off-grid solar, waste to energy, a big problem in continents that I work in, like Africa. How do we reduce or increase the risk ambition of finance? The risk appetite of a lot of climate finance is still too restrictive to meet the projects that are available on the ground.
Do you think there's a question of communication, or do you think it's a question of risk appetite that the traditional finance finds barriers to entry to these types of what I would call more charismatic projects? You've seen both sides because you've got the background in finance, like I do.
I think it's a lot simpler than that. I think it's not communication at all. They're fully aware of their risk appetite. And I think you have to look at it. The lower their risk appetite, the more likely they are to get the money back to lend it again. However, you know, we need them to increase that risk appetite and really understand that, okay, they might not always get it back the first time, but if you put in the robust methodologies, if you have the data, if you have the right projects with the right support, there is a much better chance for that to happen.
Okay, ladies, thank you so much. I think we're about time to wrap up. It's been really super interesting to speak with both of you. Thank you for joining us. And thank you so much to the SDG Media Center. Cheers.